Thanks, Elena. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for coming back after a wonderful meal. So this is a nice segue into this particular topic, given the topics that we looked at earlier in the morning, because we were taking a strategic view, and now we'll get down more into the operational details and the supply chain issues associated with relocating, right? And as all of us have been reading in the popular press, I mean, there is this big emphasis about bringing back manufacturing into the US, in particular, some of these specific areas of semiconductor manufacturing or battery manufacturing. And one of the challenges that, as operations folks, we worry about is that it's not just enough to just relocate one particular unit or a manufacturing unit, right? It's really relocating an entire supply chain. Right? And the federal government has initiated several such initiatives, particularly the Tech Hub, right, in the semiconductor space, where they are now creating funds and trying to figure out how to bring back semiconductor manufacturing into the United States. And there is a reason for that, that if you look at from 1990 onwards, right, the share of the global market for semiconductors, the US share, has dropped significantly. It used to be around 36-40%. Now it's only down to 10 or 12%, right? And there is this big impetus. University at Buffalo, of course, and my center is also involved with the Tech Hub project, where we've gotten some grants to do the supply chain activation network to figure out, how one can build such an ecosystem. Simultaneously, there is this emphasis in battery manufacturing and trying to figure out how to relocate those supply chains too, because if you look at the global share, it's still very minimal, around 10% based on, different sources that we've looked at, right? So we have three experts here from the industry, right? And let me introduce each one of them. And they will be talking, about the specifics about one of the firms that they are involved with or the initiatives they are involved with, and hopefully, cover some of these points for us. So the first, I want to introduce John Taylor, who's the Director of International Supply Chain Development, GoSemi, Empire State Development. John, in his role, executes global engagement initiatives to strategically position New York as a premier hub for international semiconductor firms, working to attract and support supply chain firms expanding into the state. Right? So he's going to be, giving us his perspective about relocating supply chains for the semiconductor industry. The second speaker is Basit Ali Sheikh Suleiman. He is the Vice President of Supply Chain at C4V, battery materials expert right here. 10 plus years of experience in battery domain, specializing in lithium-ion battery technology, and a strong focus on supply chain development, as well as cellular manufacturing and electrochemistry. So that's a very rare combination. You have a chemical engineering expert with supply chain expertise. He leads a cross-functional team in scaling advanced battery technologies, including prismatic and cylindrical cell platforms. Our third speaker is Dr. Balki Iyer. He is the chairman and founder of Bridge Green Upcycle. Balki Iyer is a seasoned energy executive with proven track record of driving growth in global giants like GE and startups, including 3 successful exits and a NASDAQ listing. Balki founded Bridge Green Upcycle in 2023, championing circular economy principles. Bridge Green is an urban mining company and a technology platform to convert waste to critical minerals, starting with lithium-ion batteries. Right? So the way I've sort of set this up is that I'm going to give each of our panelists an opportunity to present their ideas. So they do have presentations. And at the end of their presentations, then I can pose a few questions and we can open it up to the audience here. So without further ado, let me ask John to start his presentation.
Great, thank you, Milind, and great to be with you all. So I'm going to spend just the next couple minutes, taking a little bit of the longer view of domesticating the supply chain in the semiconductor industry. Right, obviously we're in a unique moment now, but there's a lot of years of preparation that go in to be able to meet that moment. So kind of walk through what we've done at New York State, kind of the current state of the supply chain, and kind of where we go from here. Right. So first of all, why semiconductors, right? Why is this, an important industry for the U.S. and for New York? I think one piece is certainly the size of the industry, right? $1 trillion industry, probably in the next year or so, several years kind of ahead of of initial estimates. So certainly the size of the industry, but from an economic development standpoint, right, the type of jobs available in that industry, right, 60% of jobs available with less than a 4-year degree, and the multiplier, right? So for every job created in this industry, about 7 jobs are created, in the local economy around that. So a real, appealing industry for economic development. That said, just because there's an opportunity there, right, doesn't mean that a state or place can take advantage of that opportunity, right? You need to have assets in place to do that. Certainly, New York, had and has, strong position in terms of, water, power, land availability, kind of key, infrastructure pieces for the industry. But I would argue, a really central part of our advantage for attracting the supply chain here is in our academic and innovation ecosystem, right? 2 Ivy League institutions, a number of public and private tier 1 research universities, strong community colleges across the state, right? So really having that base in place, has helped the growth in this industry and positions us for, to be able to compete going forward. Right. So just in the last couple of years, New York has had over $124 billion in new investment announced in this industry. I'll talk a little bit about some of those projects, but you can see here a little bit on the timeline, right, of when I say this isn't an overnight success. We've been at this as a state for 30 years, right? Not to mention our long-standing history with companies like IBM and others, right, that kind of created that base to be able to take advantage. Going back to 2002, the state made a major investment in the Albany Nanotech Complex, which has since become the largest public-private R&D facility in North America for semiconductors. More than $25 billion in investment, mostly private investment at this point. A few years after that, GlobalFoundries built its first fab in upstate New York. Governor Hochul comes into office, signs the Green Chips program into law. This is a major incentive program for significant semiconductor projects. So again, kind of positioning New York on the forefront on that side, followed by announcements by Micron, which I'll talk about in a bit, and GlobalFoundries. So we're seeing kind of the fruits of the years of effort, starting to bear fruit. Right. So when we talk about the supply chain and kind of building that out in New York, what are we talking about here? Right. So we're really working as a state to support growth in all elements of the supply chain, as Milind said. Right. It's not, you don't want to just have one piece of it, but it's really kind of building that full spectrum. So everything from the design of chips through manufacturing the chips to manufacturing the equipment that that makes the chips, the fab infrastructure, all the way through the back end manufacturing of testing and packaging those chips and getting them to end markets. Right. So just a quick overview of some of the major players today in our ecosystem. I mentioned before companies like IBM, GlobalFoundries. Wolfspeed has a major fab in the Utica area. Micron, we have a number of projects, but again, the full supply chain, right? So a company like Edwards out in Western New York, right, makes the vacuum equipment that is a core part of building these fabs, right? So it's not just making the chips; it's all the equipment that goes into making the chips and the fabs themselves. Just to put a couple of numbers on, what this looks like, more than 156 companies in the supply chain across New York State. Again, $124 billion of announced investment just since 2022. And by the end of this decade, 1 out of every 4 chips made in the U.S. Will be made in New York or immediately adjacent to the state of New York. So really becoming a hub for the production, as to Milind's point earlier, over the years we've seen a decline in U.S. Chip production, trying to be a focal point for the resurgence of that opportunity. Kind of the The major project, announced a couple years ago, Micron is coming to the central New York area. This is a $100 billion investment over the next 20 years. They'll be building 4 fabs. At full build out, 9,000 employees directly at the Micron campus, and that's going to support 50,000 jobs throughout the regional economy, right? So really transformational project and the types of things that we've been working to position ourselves for in the current moment. Right. So in addition to, some of those, advantages and kind of where the supply chain is currently, there are other things that we do as a state, right, to support the business case for companies, looking at New York as an opportunity or as a place to do business, right? The first of those is around kind of tax and incentives, right? So even before getting to the incentives piece, I think, something that flies out under the radar sometimes, particularly for manufacturers, no corporate income tax for qualified manufacturers in the state of New York, no sales tax on machinery equipment, right? So that there are several kind of baseline advantages, again, in the manufacturing space. And then certainly on top of that, with the incentives that the state has put together, I mentioned the Green Chips program, for projects that are over $3 billion of investment, but we have a number of other business incentives for projects throughout the supply chain, R&D tax credits, workforce training tax credits. So the state has really, really stepped forward to help make that business case for companies choosing to locate in New York. Beyond incentives, though, what we hear from companies all the time, that's certainly a big part of it, right? But there's also the time to market. How can we help de-risk projects, right? So a major part of our work, the state's put more than $400 million into site readiness work to make sure that we have the sites to accommodate these companies that want to grow here in New York. So again, it's both the financial side and then kind of be able to de-risk those projects and kind of quick time to market. So just to wrap up, right? What are we doing now to position ourselves for future growth in the industry and take advantage of this moment, kind of globally, but then also on the heels of projects like Micron and others. So, my office, the Governor's Office of Semiconductor Expansion Management and Integration, or GoSemi, we were created just a couple of years ago on the heels of Micron's announcement. But really, we focus day in and day out on supporting this industry, whether it's working with companies here in the U.S. My role is supporting those companies internationally that are looking to enter the market. I talked about a few of these things that we support. Certainly on the supply chain development side. We also do a lot of work with businesses, in the U.S. already that haven't traditionally been in the semiconductor supply chain, but may have an opportunity to pivot there, right? So how do we support both, bringing new companies in and supporting those, existing companies here in New York? And just to leave you with a couple numbers on, just incentives, the workforce development piece. And really looking forward to the conversation and hearing from my fellow panelists here.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Let me invite now Basit Suleiman to come and give his.
Hi, everyone. My name is Basit. I work with C4V. So C4V is a battery technology company out of New York, Binghamton, and we enable technology and cell manufacturing in the US. And we have our first gigafactory coming up in Binghamton, New York. And apart from that, I think the last few years, we have been working on building a non-FEOC compliant supply chain, which is something which is definitely required in the US right now with the policy shift. And also we do work on domestication, which is part of the efforts as well. And why does domestication matters right now? I think one is the surging demand in automation in EV and ESS space, which subdivides into grid, energy storage, and other applications as well. And given the growth today, I think there is a significant growth, which is going to be at 5 to 10x by 2030. To put that in perspective, it will be about 200 gigawatt hour of capacity size. And today, US is at 1/10 or less than 1/10 of the capacity. And we have geopolitical risk in the region as well with the Asian partners right now, where China exceeds in terms of supply chain positioning. And we are still in the positioning gap in this. And policy momentum, there has been new policies in place starting from 2026 until 2030, which is giving it a serious push in the ecosystem space. And we'll be looking more about it in the next future slides. And speaking about battery value chain, I think we speak about it in a vertical integration standards. I think going from raw material precursors and then going to midstream partners all the way to downstream partners who will be enabling backend integration technologies. And right now in the US, OEMs have a very good foothold with the backend integration of designs, but there are certainly gaps in between these spaces from extraction points, refinements, and all the way to the midstream partner sections. And to give you an idea between Asia-led and the US value supply chain right now in the market, over 70% of our cathode anode material, which is controlled by China right now, and then about nearly less to few in terms of the graphite control being export controlled from China as well. And even though US remains in innovation and R&D and IP control, where the system lacks is that how do we transfer that from lab to a manufacturing scale, and which requires significant capital infrastructures and capital equipment in place as well. And what does domestication mean? In terms of localization, how do we transfer and bring in partners across the globe in terms of know-how and manufacturing expertise into the US, and regionalization across US, Canada, and Mexico? And given that it's a very much of a refinement-rich countries in between them. And strategic independence in terms of supply disruptions through diversified sourcing and partnership. So in terms of key challenges, we have broken them down into a few parameters here in terms of raw material processing gaps and manufacturing and cost assumptions. And in terms of raw materials, limited access to mines, which exist in the US today, and also the extraction points, which are much more expensive than what's happening in the Asian market. And processing gaps in which this is where the significant gaps comes in place apart from the material itself, and which speaks about more on the scale and between pre-cam and cam side of it. And cell manufacturing, as we know, as also C4V is part of the cell manufacturing side too, which is a very high capital index market in terms of the capex being about 100 million for a gigawatt hour scale, and which also divides into a sub-parameters where in terms of cost competitiveness, which is about 20 to 50% higher than the premium market, which is making it difficult to adopt to any US standards. And also this also subdivides into a few of the factors in terms of labor cost, energy cost, and scaling costs as well associated with that. And in terms of opportunities, I think policy is the number one key right now. And we have the 45X advanced tax credit, which is coming in the US, which is enabling for cell manufacturing, which would certainly cover the premium cost, which will be paid for the US market and adopt domestic value supply chains. And domestic content requirement, which is about 60% in the US right now for 2026, and they're just looking to increase to 90% by 2030. So what it means to a cell manufacturer is that it's no more an option, but more like an adoption point where we have to switch to a domestic manufacturing application. And in terms of federal grants right now, I think a few of the parameters like lithium, graphite have been considered as DOE grants. And we do have some federal initiatives come in place where we'll be able to support for the scaling up in the US. And in terms of other opportunities like ecosystem build out, so in terms of OEMs are trying to build out an ecosystem in terms of controlling their value chain and building out just not the cell manufacturing side of it, but also bringing partners from the US market. And some of the partners like Ford, Tesla, and GM have been adopting to the standards and bringing in ecosystem build out in the US. And new partnerships and alliances, I think that one of the strategic layout is that forming joint ventures across the globe in bringing some of the partners from Asia to the US. And startup companies in the US right now are most likely focused on the technology development. And there are new ways in terms of going out from the traditional characterization process to a different idea. Those can be gaps which some of the companies in New York have been expertise on the dry coating side and also advanced cathode chemistries. And other opportunities on emerging pathways. So where this will lead to, I think this would be more of a suppliers in the US and also a hand-holding path with cell manufacturers. I think battery space is highly volatile, given the space where I think there is a lot of been challenges across these areas. And this is due to high adoption rates and technology shift over time within the next 5 years. So I think in this perspective, I think making it more of a modular approach in terms of cell manufacturing as well as the supply relationship itself. And moving companies from TRL3 to TRL7 with some scaling up companies. I think understanding the points of cell manufacturing perspectives and also onboarding a few of their offtakes with different industries. And that will give them leverage in terms of cost and the quality controls. And that'll be it from my side. I look forward to Balki.
Thank you. Basit, and now let me welcome Balki to come and give his thoughts.
Thanks, Milind. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having us over here. My name is Balki, as Professor Milind said, and okay, great. That's pretty great. Otherwise, I can talk.
Get a PDF.
She knows, yeah, the PDF document.
But while we are setting up the slides, I'll just want to kind of categorize a few things, right? Here we are talking about domestication of this lithium-ion batteries. I think it's important to understand there is an antonym to this word, right? We all knew that word. It's called outsourcing. Let's not forget the big pink elephant in the room. We systematically did that for several decades, and now we're paying the price. I remember coming to this country as a grad student, 3 decades back. And my first job in GE was actually dispatched to Milwaukee to see how we can outsource the line over to Budapest. And you sit there and you wonder, saying, why are we moving this electronic manufacturing that we are so good at, but people who have done it here, why are we moving this stuff? Frankly, I felt at that point in time that the people smarter in the room who would make these right decisions. But now we've come a full circle. It's important to acknowledge that that's 3 decades back. 30 years of what we do is going to take longer to undo. And that's not when it started. It started even before that. We just need to appreciate and acknowledge that sometimes when you have to have a longer term thinking around this stuff, that pays off much better. Otherwise, we don't have to do all of this scrambling. John talked about a few things. As a startup company, I can tell you that securing materials is one thing. Securing labor is another thing. Securing equipment is even harder. Our dependence on a lot of these stuff is just incredible, and it's just going to take a lot of work across the board to kind of unwind these things. And one of the big reasons why the outsourcing happened was economics. We all knew that. We all knew what that was. But the reason why the domestication is happening is because of geopolitics. And so the underlying factor is very different, and the type of action that we need to take is very different. We are seeing across the world nationalization that we've not seen in the last 8 decades. Let's look at US as kind of being the superpower for the last 8 decades of the world and the arbitrator, the controller of a lot of the stuff. And we are kind of taking a different role right now. And that's what the whole world is seeing. And that's driving a lot of these nationalization, domestic supply chain. And I really see this as a huge opportunity for us to establish industrialization, jobs, good industries in this country. And I think we should just leverage and just go throw the kitchen sink at this. And that's our opportunity right now, which will help us undo some of the stuff in a lot shorter time than we did in outsourcing this stuff. So let me talk about a few important things. John talked about the semiconductor industry. Basit talked about batteries. Bridgescreen, we are in the business of providing circular economy. What that simply means is that we have value that's sitting in a lot of the waste. How do we convert that, put it back into the circular economy here? So 1, we don't have to depend on foreign sources. 2, we don't have to depend on more environmentally toxic ways of extracting some of these things. That's really what we do. So the 2 main products that we provide is critical minerals that can be used in any industries. Second life batteries that can be used again in a host of electricity type stuff. What is driving the domestic market? Let's look at that first. First and foremost, when you look at the batteries, United States is seeing a surge in electricity demand that we've not seen since World War II. I think everybody loves the word AI. Everybody loves the word data centers. If you look at data centers, it's just a nightmare for people in the electricity space. Data centers are not stable load. It's an extremely spiky load. And there are feeders and distribution centers that are going to see a single load as 50% of their load. Never happened in any other load. Data centers are going to drive that. I mean, sometimes you set up a one of these giga centers, it's going to be like setting up 100 Costco's in the same place. That's what we're talking about. So as sexy as this word is, as beautiful as it is, it's a nightmare for people working in the electricity space. And that's driving a lot of the growth. That's driving a lot of the surge that we are seeing. And frankly, without that surge, we already had a massive trade deficit of these batteries, because batteries are not a nice to have for this. We have tons of spiky load, and we have tons of spiky generation, largely because of renewables, wind, solar, and all of the stuff that's already on the grid. And the only Swiss Army knife that you have as a tool is batteries. So it's not an option. It doesn't matter whether we suppress the EV demand and we say we don't want to drive electric cars. It doesn't really matter. The battery demand is just going to still go through the roof. And look at where we are, $15 billion in trade deficit for batteries already, importing a lot. And now we need to do a lot more of this. And by the way, more than 85% of these batteries came from two countries, China and Korea. And we have some serious issues with those things. So one, you have this massive electricity demand, and there's already a huge trade deficit, which is going to get even more accentuated. Let's just acknowledge that. Second, the material content. If you look at metal content in anything, doesn't matter, look around you. Just look at even your phones, look at your cars, look at your anything. The metal content of these things have just dramatically increased. But even more interesting, the type of metals, the dollar value of this metal has just grown significantly. That is the reality. Whether it's the drugs, pharmaceutical that you take, it's the furniture you use, it's the cars, it's all of these things have gone up significantly in terms of both metal content and metal value. Effectively, what it's signaling is today, the geopolitics are all driven by minerals. There's a reason for that. 30 years back, we were fighting for oil. Today, we are fighting because of minerals. We want to make Canada the 51st state, and we want to go occupy Greenland. We want to do all sorts of things because of only one reason. It's minerals. And that minerals is really what's driving the energy transition over the next 2 to 3 decades are going to be a material transition. And that's what we feel is important. Unfortunately, mining is not an option. There is tons of other natural reasons, capital reasons, efficiency reasons, and we don't have access to a lot of the mines. We're not a mining country. So the future is not going to be about mining as much as it's going to be about processing. That's really what we believe, and that's what we're trying to do here. We don't have access to mines, but we have access to tons of resources. The United States is the largest user of batteries, and all of these batteries go to waste. Unlike oil that gets combusted, batteries don't get combusted. They still have the metal content sitting in them. Aluminum over the last 4 years have gone from 25% recycling to 75% recycling. Zinc is about 30% recycled. Iron's about 50% recycled. Tires are recycled at about 50%. So all of these happen because of stable policies, dependence, and good economics and technology. And you look at some of these materials that are sitting in the batteries today, manganese, lithium carbonate, nickel, cobalt, tons and tons of them. And we have huge dependence on these. 80% of these critical minerals that are imported, just that value alone is about $185 billion. I mean, we import a lot of these materials. These materials don't just go into batteries alone. They go into everything, the drugs you take to things that you use every day. So what is the future show? Future shows that we are going to have lots and lots of these resources, lots and lots of these waste. Unless we have a way to kind of capture this value of this waste, we are going to continuously depend on the foreign sources. So we truly believe that being able to have the right technology, right policy, right processing to recover these critical minerals, to put them back into the circular economy is probably the single most important way to get out of the dependence from foreign materials. It's not the only way. It's going to be one of the most important and the faster way. So what we do want to see is we want to see strong regulation. We want to see, logistics, because think about how the aluminum cans get collected. Think about all of the stuff that happens with the collection. So there's got to be a lot of ways to support these things. There's got to be a good amount of capital. Capital is a very important raw material for any of these growth. You see bankers and everybody sitting there and kind of holding their purse strings on things that, the word battery now has become a big anathema because everybody has to cross through a graveyard of deals to get to this stuff. And that's not how we need to approach things. If you want to really be a leader in this space, we need to start, speaking with our capital, put our money where our mouth is, and that's really what the ambitions need to be. And last, technology. Technology has a way of answering these questions. We as business people, we are technocrats. We understand how to solve things using technology with the right environment. And that's really how we see the 4 important things. Last plug about Bridge Green. Bridge Green as a company, we are an urban mine. We are headquartered in New York. We're actually born out of Binghamton, New York. We have a very, very seasoned leadership team. We actually do 2 things. We create an urban mine where we extract these critical minerals that go into many industries, as I said. Secondly, we also use some of these batteries, which we believe should not be destroyed for their materials. It actually should be reused. Because it's not just the economically right thing to do, it's the environmentally right thing to do. So we actually look at a lot of the second life batteries to see how we can deploy them in some use cases. And we do this through technology and process innovation. We've gained a lot of traction in the market, but ultimately it's about those 2 things. 1, strengthening our domestic critical mineral and battery supply chain and being able to create good, sticky industrial jobs. This is reshoring. It's not recycling, it's reshoring. And if you were to do that, that's really what's going to, that's going to have the bigger impact in communities and societies. And doing all this stuff, irrespective of how the wind blows in DC, we got to have some North Star. I think we believe doing it with the carbon, giving carbon a seat at the table is the right thing to do for the long term. And that's truly something we believe as a company. And that is something that we truly want to see in our businesses and our processes as well. So that's about who we are. And I give it back to Milind.
Thanks, Bhagi. That was so. As I was listening to the 3 of you, and the way you put out your points, I mean, it's quite obvious that offshoring, for whatever reason it happened, labor arbitrage, cost arbitrage, supply chains that went outside have become far more efficient over the time that the US was not part of those supply chains. And this abrupt shock that is coming in, let's bring everything back, but to insert yourself in these global supply chains with the efficiency that they have already achieved outside is going to be extremely daunting, if not impossible. Right? Now, there are 2 aspects that all of you are discussing. One is, of course, the technology that needs to be achieved, and 2, the efficiency and scale that needs to be achieved, and productivity enhancement that has to happen with that. So it almost seems like there is this missing middle in all these industries. Right. So, John, I want to start with you and get your thoughts on that in terms of this missing middle, both in terms of building capacity for small and medium-term enterprises, human resources. How are you thinking, or how is state of New York and the federal government thinking of bridging that gap? Because that seems to be like the big bottleneck before even one can start talking about scaling.
Sure. No, thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, I think a big focus for our work as we see the growth of of companies like Micron, of GlobalFoundries expansion, of smaller companies, small to mid-sized companies throughout the supply chain, right? Is that that availability of workforce, right, and talent. And as I talked about in my prepared remarks, certainly that's been an advantage for us, in that we have those those institutions in place, but and this is not true just for New York. This is, every state that's competing with this. We're not at the scale that we need to be, right, to have, to have that talent there, right? So there's been a real scale up in terms of, colleges like, Syracuse University, right, has dramatically expanded. They're dramatically expanding their engineering offerings, particularly for the semiconductor industry, to serve Micron. The state has created this new program called On-Ramp, a $200 million investment to create 4 workforce development hubs throughout upstate New York that are going to train thousands of individuals to get them from get them ready for technician jobs in the fabs, right? So again, I talked about the big draw for the state is that those jobs available without a 4-year degree. But we've got to make sure that we prepare those students, because it still takes a lot of skill to do those jobs, even if there's not a degree involved. So, so the state's making a number of investments, on the workforce side, on the supporting businesses to pivot into the supply chain. So again, the state's making those investments and working with partners to make that.
In the same vein, Basit, right? Let me ask you this question, particularly about lithium-ion batteries, right? And you mentioned this, that there are all these challenges, but in your mind, if one had to prioritize the bottleneck, I mean, I'm coming from an operations researcher's perspective, which ones would you want to focus on right now? And of course, what are your mitigation strategies for those bottlenecks? And if you're thinking scaling up, and if you're thinking of, tier 2, tier 3 kind of firms starting to get into this business, what do you think are their biggest hurdles, or what is the challenge that they would face?
Sure. As Balki was mentioning as well about critical minerals being the being the strategical point right now, and it's of high expectations at this point of time. And I think we see battery supply chain as a complete value chain, just not the raw material side of it, more on the processing part of it as well. Just from a, for example, perspective side of it, lithium is one of the key primary elements going into the battery ecosystem. And we do have, China controls for the most part outside it, but outside groups such as Australia, and we have a good region of Peru, Argentina, even though these are countries which has a good FTA with the US market, and also we have good relations with them, the issue certainly relies on processing part of it and refinement. Today, almost 90% of them goes to China. And even though we take that, I think there's definitely a gap in between that. And for tier 1 companies established at higher scale, it's much quicker to adopt to any of the changes in place. But tier 2 and tier 3, more like a startup to a mid-scale companies. At the US standpoint today, I think the ecosystem is already built for different industries. Like we have different kind of products like foils, binders, which go into a different ecosystem today, like for packaging industries or for automotive industries. And these are CapEx already put in place. And where it lags behind is the technology partnership side of it. And smaller companies try to be building upon with the existing CapEx built, and going with a JV joint venture ecosystem might create a win-win situation in supporting all of these gigafactories in place.
Great. So that leads me to this alternate that, Balki, you talked about, that, okay, one can source or one can harvest, right? And in the circular economy, the idea is that, okay, we can kind of harvest these from already, produced products itself. And I think that's a great example, to sort of increase the supply. But in your mind, right, what is that biggest barrier that is preventing other firms from getting into this kind of a business and start doing this? And where is this gap in technology that will come through eventually for these firms? And what needs to be done in order to bridge that?
Look, I first and foremost, harvesting is not the only solution. I just want to be very clear. I think it's part of the solution. And I think you always want to you don't want to be thinking that you got to do an all or nothing. That's the only way to kind of go down, right? So it's always got to be part of a solution. Having said that, I'll say this, right? To me, I'd give United States and a lot of this, incubators and accelerators and a lot of this stuff kind of A+ in terms of technology. We actually invest quite a bit in technology. We try to come up with good amount of technology. In fact, I can tell you that if you just look at the recycling space, we look at hydrometallurgy, or you look at plasma technology, direct recycling, a lot of the stuff, we've actually made quite a bit of much more progress than even China has, frankly. However, the rub is, I don't think we do a very good job in actually helping these technologies scale. I think everybody hears the word valley of death and all of the stuff. Those are actually true. It actually exists. I think we have a great way of catching 10 to 100. We have a great way of harvesting 0 to 1. I think we suck at 1 to 10. That's the reality of where we are. I think the capital is not willing to go do the FOAC projects. The capital is not willing to support it. The regulation doesn't support it. I think we just suck at it. So to me, there was some schizophrenic reaction from governments. Oh, let me just fund this with IRA. No, let me not fund this with IRA. Let me just create this department. I think there's a lot of that stuff, and I hate to say it. It's across the board. It's not just federal government. It's also state government. So I think we actually, as startups and a business community, we hoped that some of the states that are more progressive, like New York, would actually have a little bit of a double down effect when the federal administration pulled back on some of the stuff. But we didn't see that. The intent is there, but we didn't see it in action. So I think, to me, where we really need to do as a country, if you're really serious about this, first and foremost, we got to think about this as a long-term strategy. We can't have IRA put up and create all this activity and then blow up IRA because the administration changed, and then we do something and then we change administration and then blow up that thing. Like, we can't act like banana republics, right? So we got to start taking a long-term view on a lot of these stuff. And then critical mineral, look, I think I feel blessed that I'm working on critical minerals, because I can tell you I was in DC meeting with a lot of people on both sides of the aisle. It's probably one of the very few bipartisan topics today, honestly. I mean, you could talk about everything else, and you can go red, go blue. I think very few topics that are bipartisan. I feel a little blessed that we are on the topic, but that topic needs regulatory support, legislative support, capital support.
So prioritization with everybody.
Absolutely. I mean, we got to put our money where our mouth is. Otherwise, we're not going to see the results that we need to see. And I think the government's starting to do it. We see Office of Critical Minerals putting some stuff out there, etc. But I think we need to see a lot of response from private capital. We need to see a lot of response from state. Even state of New York, there's a lot more work that we could do here. And I think that I think we're not going to get the results that we want if we don't do that.
Yeah. How are we doing with that? Open it up for questions. Yeah, why don't you take it now? Yeah. Want to give him a mic?
Leaving intact. I'm fast.
Yeah. For those of you who didn't hear the question, I'll repeat the question if that's
Yeah.
okay. His question was, are people shipping the batteries to us for us to pull it apart, or how does it work? I think the quick answer is yes. We obviously work with the first mile as well, but we work with a lot of first mile aggregators or players to be able to get it. Ultimately, we are a processing and urban mine company, so we do bring those batteries in. As a first step, as I said, one of the things we do is to look at whether these batteries really need to get stripped apart or put back together. So there's a evaluation of, just like I always say, you don't walk into a hospital and you get ushered into the surgery room, right? Because that's not the right way to approach any patient. Similarly, it's not the right way to approach batteries. For those of you who understand batteries, 80% life is considered end of life. If you have a power application, whether it's in a stationary energy storage or in a mobile application, 80%, when you reach 80%, you're considered done. I mean, how many other things that you have in life that actually, if it just reaches 80% of their capacity, you just say it's done? I mean, it's like if you're supposed to live 80 years and you just reach 20 years and you say you're done. I mean, my daughter thinks that about me, but that's different. But that's really how we treat batteries. And I don't think that's right economically or environmentally. So we actually look at how do we put them back into second life, where it can go from 80% all the way down to like 40, 50%. And so anyway, so that's one thing we do. And then we obviously look at those that don't qualify to see how we can extract the materials out of them.
Thank you.
Hi, Balki. I'm Sanjay. I'm a Cornell MBA student. I love the work you're doing at your company. So I had a question about about using NAFTA for what you're doing here, if labor costs can be saved by setting it up elsewhere. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah. So labor is not the only arbitrage, just to be very clear. If you look at McKinsey did a study that understood that when you look at the processing of these secondary materials, right, 35%, third of the cost comes from actually logistics. So it actually supports domestication, for lack of a better word, if you think about it, right? So it's just because instead of mining and stuff like that, you can actually source the materials here. So labor is just one small portion of it. A lot of it is about logistics as well. So I think, NAFTA is one of the ways, right? I mean, you can look at, but I don't know, honestly, like there's a lot of issues between Canada and US right now, US and Mexico. I don't know how to solve that problem. It's way above my intellectual capacity and pay grade to figure that out. But what we do know is that the unit cost economics matters. Otherwise, you're chasing valuation, you're chasing revenues, which I think is a kiss of death for a lot of startup companies. So we do care about unit costs. We do care about how we process, where we process, but we are very, very conscious about the whole concept of domestic supply chain, which we truly believe we can actually achieve unit cost positive economics in these recycling.
Just a clarification that NAFTA is now the United States, Mexico, Canada agreement. Okay. But we love NAFTA. It's easier to say.
First, thank you so much for your insight. I'm curious about how much of the challenge is mindset in terms of what it means to be an American, in the sense that have we really bought into recycling, and do we fundamentally, right? Do people fundamentally think that it is something that means to be American? And also, how is it that this becomes almost like a currency, in the sense that when I think about communities in New York, we have people who pick up bottles every single day as part of recycling, but there's no real place within the city that really has invested in things like taking glass, right? And investing in it as an industry. So, but the recycling bottles at the very low level is a currency. People collect it for the nickels, right? So how do you now take that idea and get people to buy into this idea of the harvesting of lithium batteries and shifting mindsets?
Yeah, that's a great question, by the way. I do believe United States has actually shown tremendous amount of leadership in this aspect in many things. Believe it or not, the zinc tablets that you eat in the night, 30% of them come from recycling zinc. So the soda cans that you drink out of, 75% come from recycled soda cans. Plastic recycling, a lot of it is responsible things to do, a lot of it is economic things to do, e-waste. So there's a lot of stuff that's actually happened that's economically viable. So I just want to make sure that I highlight that it's not a feel-good tree hugging type of thing. It's actually, even in those low metal content. Now scale this up 100 times. We're talking about cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, copper. Have you guys seen the price of copper these days? Yeah, please start investing in them. So when you look at high metal content, it's not kids collecting stuff. And I mean, this is huge business. Because what I want to emphasize is the topics around geopolitics, around critical minerals, is what's capturing all the news waves. What's not getting captured is the undertone of technology and business that's emerging slowly. I think if you catch that, you will realize that the metal content, this is not about let's do the nice thing kind of a thing. This is actually about making incredible leadership, technology leadership for this country, to be self-reliant on critical minerals. Don't forget, these critical minerals are stepping stones into every industry, not just energy industry. It's everything. And you have all these things sitting there. And you know what we do today? Sorry? Even worse. We either toss it out in the landfill, or sometimes we just pre-process and send it back to China. It's unfortunate. And then they make more batteries and more things and send it back to us. So I think it's a huge opportunity for us.
Gene Detroyer, University of Sanya in China. John, what you outlined for the state of New York is terrific. When I look at the progress that Arizona and Michigan have made, and they're kind of in the forefront like New York, they've already run into labor problems and bodies, talent, education. You've outlined education, but how about bodies and talent?
No, I think it's a great point, and something why I've tried to emphasize that in both my remarks and kind of the my first response here is I think that is issue number one. We we check all the boxes, for, again, kind of the infrastructure piece. We have that existing ecosystem. We have the academic institutions and the sources of talent, and now we're really scaling up, right? So yeah, it's certainly something we're keeping an eye on. We've seen, in Arizona and other places, some of the challenges there. So yeah, really trying to get ahead of that with some of the investments that we're making. And I'd say really a lot of our academic institutions and partners have stepped up to start creating those new programs, working directly with companies to make sure that the academic programs are meeting specific needs of those companies. So, so far we haven't seen that. Micron, is under construction now. The first fab is expected to open will open in 2030. We'll be ready to meet that. So, but something that we're very aware of and working hard on to address.